ladies and gentlemen, with that, as we move ahead, this is where we're talking about shifting gears to meet future challenges. But on that note, I could also request our members of the audience to shift your seats and probably come forward because it's a final fireside chat. So those who want to make it super interactive, I could request all the ones who are seated right behind, you can please move forward and take your seats so that we can invite our speakers really quick on the stage, and let's get another insightful session started for all of you. Now, while the stage is being set, let me also quickly introduce our speakers who will be part of the fireside chat. First up to spearhead this session, we have with us Neeraj Bansal, co-head and COO, India Global, KPMG in India. And he comes with more than 23 years of professional experience, who holds a strong relationship with member firms and across ASEAN, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, with a focus on growing inbound and outbound business operations. Joining him, we also have with us our next set of speakers. We have Anshul Singhal, Managing Director, Welspun One Logistics Park, who comes with 15 years of leadership experience in the infrastructure and real estate sector, with a track record of establishing 5 new businesses from the ground up. So we have with us right up Neeraj Bansal, along with Anshul Singhal, and let me also invite Rahul Pandit, CEO, Horizon Industrial Parks, who comes with more than 30 years of experience in building and transforming businesses. He was earlier the founding managing director and CEO of Hampstead Living, a Warburg Pincus joint venture for rental housing. And our final speaker, we have with us Rajat Garg, Director and Head Investments, Logistics, Industrial Data Centers, ESR India. He's a real estate private equity investment specialist who comes with more than 16 years of experience with world's leading fund managers in India, US, and South Asia across the asset classes. A humble request to our previous set of speakers, if I could request you to take your discussions in the pre-function area. And as for those who are still seated here, can we have a round of applause to welcome our final set of speakers for the final fireside chat. I'm going to quickly hand it over to Mr. Neeraj Bansal. Over to you, sir.
Hello. Yeah, this is working. So great. I welcome you all to this final fireside panel, as we're calling it here. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you be here. I think with the introductions out, we'll probably dive straight into the panel. I mean, we've got some fantastic set of speakers for this session, and I would want that we are able to get the best out of them. So my request to all would be to kind of keep. I've got a few questions in that, so we'll see that if we are able to run through all the questions, then that'll be great. If not, then also we'll like to get some like some facts, some numbers, some depth from yourselves on that. So. What we're doing here is that we will touch upon a few themes. So we will talk about initially starting with the warehouse expansion in India. Then we will look at technology, innovation, warehousing. And then we'll go to investments and warehousing. And post that, we will touch upon some of the policies, some of the changes that are happening in the regulatory setup as well, as a last section on it there. Anshul, coming to you first. Warehousing sector at the current time is looking at a record net absorption this year, with almost 40 million plus square feet getting absorbed, which is like, much more than the pre-pandemic levels as well. What factors do you see are driving this growth, and are they sustainable?
Yeah, so see, a lot of people ask me about warehousing growth. Is it sustainable, or is it already plateauing out, or बहुत लोग आ गए हैं अभी तो रोज कोई नया प्लेयर का नाम सुन रहा है. But I always say that today India's total stock of warehousing is 307 million square feet, right? Now at 307 million square feet, we are equal to Nashville in the US, right? Which is like some 43rd or 44th state. If you look at Boston City alone, just Boston City is 250 million square feet, just one city. And India as a country of 1.6 odd billion people is 300 million square feet. So we haven't even scratched the surface of what this demand can absorb. My personal view, and this is different from what all the CBRE, JLLs, Cushmans say, is that we will be growing at a CAGR of minimum 20, maybe even 25% year on year. This is my personal view, and we've seen that growth happen. So a year and a half back, we were at 198 million. Today we are at 307 million. Just fast forward to 2030, which is hardly 7 to 8 years from now, all our lifetimes. I believe we will cross 1 billion square feet of leased, operational, more or less space. And that is just a 20% growth. From 300 million, a compounding growth of just 20% year on year will be to 1 billion square feet. Now, obviously, when you start running numbers and math and look at absorption data and supply data, these numbers won't add up. Secondly, what's happened is that post-pandemic, the online behavior has just simply accelerated. So, you know, everybody knows people are shopping online, people are buying online. That this behavioral change has driven to customer change. And the customer change, a customer evolution, has led to the product evolution. The product has evolved in such a way that the first mile, which we call as fulfillment centers, these have become now hardly warehouses. They've become like mini factories, where there is picking, packing, processing, labeling, marking, completely automated, digitized. So we are building India's largest sort center. We are building a 700,000 square feet sort center for delivery in Bhiwandi. And that sort center, the investment that delivery is going to be putting inside that is going to be far more than what we are going to be putting in the warehouse. So that should tell you that this space is just beginning to evolve. And of course, I can just go on, but I hope you get the picture that the space is here to grow. I'd like to give others an opportunity to talk.
No, great. And with that optimistic note, Rahul, would you like to add your perspective on the same perspective in terms of what are the factors which are leading to this growth, and what do you see as sustainability there?
Thank you, Neeraj. So Anshul had a very relevant and encouraging comment on 2025, inshallah. And if you look at the factors, and if you do a comparative, we see a country like US, which is effectively 1/3 of India. The total stock in US today is 13 billion square feet. And earlier, when I was, we were chatting outside, Anshul, Rajat, and Neeraj, and I was saying, hey, my compatriot in US in the Blackstone platform, there's a gentleman called Luke Petherbridge, and he runs a platform called Link Logistics, which operates 540 million square feet today. And his intent was to be running it like a startup. So when I see what we are doing in India, is that a 540 mil is a startup, are we an infant? But to me, this is very encouraging. Reason, when I see US, they actually started propelling from 1968 till about 1985. Those 15 years where the reds and the blues came together. So is where the foundation of the US infra was laid across all sectors and asset classes, whether it was, highways, hotels, offices, and so on and so forth. Similarly, when we see China, it started taking off from 92, and that's what's happened to China. In India, our inflection point was the 2017 GST, and we are yet on the runway. Our total warehousing stock, if I see, and also the little industrial that we have, I've tried to piece together data. It's not conclusive. But in India, the total informal, unorganized stock is about 10 billion square feet. And what we see today, which is 300 plus million, is literally, the iceberg. We are seeing the portion which is visible. Because India is transacting. We do eat and we live in a country of 1.4 billion. But that stock may not be compliant. It may not be efficient. Look at our food grain. So while we are speaking of India's food security, 1/3 of our food goes waste because we don't have the right facilities. Today, when we say that, our cost of logistics in the country is 13, 14%, and hey, it should be 8 or 9%. It is not because starting from, whether it's the transport solutions or the storage solutions or the distribution solutions, they are either subscale or very inefficient. And in this landscape, this is a brilliant opportunity for us because along with the enablement, which is happening in the industry, and I also see big public sector capex commitment. Example, our Gati Shakti program, which is effectively a $1.4 trillion rolling commitment. And what's been interesting is that if we were to look at precedences, whether it is Japan or US or Europe, that private capex, succeeds public capex. So that's very encouraging. Then you look at, the PLI in India. And more than that, what's encouraging for us, and I think all of us in this room are in very interesting times, because we are actually seeing the very big macros play out in front of us. So the big macro is urbanization. And I was telling I have 2 daughters, I was telling them to say that, 85 million people, which is more than the population of Germany, have moved into our cities over the last 10 years. And she said, but hey, why don't we observe it? Why is it not perceptible? Because those 85 million people look like us. If there were 85 million Germans, coming into Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, then we would say, hey, suddenly the complexion of our cities is changing, literally and figuratively. But it's not so. And we are used to such large numbers that absorbing 85 million people in 10 years, seems so small. That's why when Anshul says that, hey, a 20-25% CAGR may be achievable, because we don't have substratum data, but this points to that. Then the other big thing is how we are digitally leapfrogging. At the smallest levels, starting from a Jan Dhan to saying what's happening to our internet penetration, this is very interesting. And third is, whatever is happening to us on the e-commerce side, it's actually leapfrogging. Because whether those are corporate entities or consumers, they don't have to go through different life cycles. So we are getting literally the 5G environment here. Separately, when I see my portfolio, which besides warehousing is industrial parks, I see a very interesting thing. We make plug-and-play factories for people to come and start operating. So effectively, give them an OpEx arbitrage versus CapEx. So we recently signed up, we are doing a massive factory for a British specialty chemicals company. And while India was on their strat map, they were wondering that, in India, how do you do land? Because it's opaque, how do you do a project? How do you do social infrastructure and licensing? So they are very happy to be saying, hey, there is this entity which globally has great quality, let's work with them. The other thing which is very encouraging, so last month, we signed up with a major Indian auto components manufacturer. This manufacturer actually has a couple of facilities that they own, factories and land that they own. But now they are saying, hey, does it make sense for a business from a returns perspective to be deploying our capital, in land or doing this? In Chennai, this month itself, there is a large funded, EV manufacturer, which comes in and says, can we start running with you very fast? And the reason is that even when PE is funding new businesses, whether it be on the services or the manufacturing side, the outlay for the capital is to produce returns on an operating business. It's not to say, what could you do with real estate? So anecdotally, the view I wanted to share is, one is that, look, India may be starting a little late in the race while we compare the rest of the world, but we have the learnings of the rest of the world, so we will leapfrog. One. Second, our own macros of urbanization and digitization are here to stay. And along with that, there is a massive advantage to us. Today, when the world is saying, how do we, look at a +1 strategy, because our global supply lines are getting rerouted. And you look at India's own consuming class. I think, this industry is, just on the runway, ready to take off. Thank you.
No, thanks. And with this, the demand which looks so promising, Rajat, I'll bring you in. So we heard Anshul and Rahul talk about the demand, which looks certainly very promising. But there are certain concerns also which have come up, there's a change in consumer sentiments, as well as the input costs have been rising. Also, if you look at the rentals that you get in India versus, let's say, global standards, there is a difference, on that.
There is.
From a, let's say, A-grade warehousing perspective. So what do you see as these? Are these like temporary disruptions, or these are like, more sustaining in nature? How do you see the industry moving forward?
So let's look to address each issue individually. I'll start with the one you picked up last, price elasticity, as I call it, or rents, right? Have rents in India increased in the last 4 or 5 years? They have. Have they increased at a pace that's faster than inflation? In most markets, yes. Right? We've gone up from maybe 20 cents per square foot per month to about 35, 40 cents per square foot per month for what we like to call as institutional grade A warehousing. Whereas, Anshul mentioned and partly Rahul mentioned, we're not just competing against existing warehouses on the basis of rents that they're charging. We're competing against inefficiencies that they kind of, let's say, inefficiencies that continue to exist in the system by, occupying grade B, grade C warehouses as compared to efficiencies that we bring in, right? Is the market appreciating that? I think the market is appreciating that. Yes, some of this growth is, has happened later than what we'd like, and a lot of tenants continue to be price elastic because ultimately we're serving as the back end of what's the entire supply chain, right? We're not a front-facing, consumer-facing retail shop where price elasticity is a lot lower than our sector. However, I think we're in a place right now where yields are sustainable. Yeah? When we talk about rents not growing enough, fact is development yields and core yields, going a little bit jargon-like in what I'm saying, have both compressed, which means that the gross margin in the business is still protected. And I think the market's understanding that this is not a very, let's say, a high margin, low volume play. This is a low to mid margin, high volume play, where, as some of the panelists have said here, we are right now 5, 7, 8% of what Indian population really needs in terms of warehousing capacity. So we will get there, but this is not a sector, and I think this is for everyone in the room who look to enter warehousing, where you'll get supernormal profits. I just don't think this is a sector that offers supernormal profits. So as long as you're realistic in what you're expecting, you're scaling up, there is money to be made.
So to round off this first theme, Anshul, just one more question on the tier 2, tier 3 cities, and you're present in some of them right now as well. So whenever a warehousing, let's say, project is announced, it has a transformation impact on that city and also the micro markets around that area. What's your view on how some of these projects have been, and what are the kind of changes that they can bring about? Because it's not only warehousing, it's also the around that real estate ecosystem also, which gets impacted there.
Good question. So, so let me just pick up the example that we did. So tier 2 has been my favorite topic and I've been saying it for last 6 years, and sometimes I sound like a broken record. But just some numbers on tier 2, right? So last year, the total rentable area, out of that, the percentage of tier 2 was about 53%. Right? Total leasable, 53 was tier 2. This year, 62% of tier 2. Now, for some reason, my good friends, Blackstone and ESR and etc., for some reason, the Goras sitting internationally don't like tier 2, right? But we love tier 2 in India. So we just launched a small project in Lucknow, 18 acres. And we have leased it higher than by 40% of the next market rental. The next guy to me is at 18 rupees, I'm at 24, 25 rupees, right, in Lucknow. And so that's just from a business stand, and it's completely leased out. The project was leased out in 6 months from start to finish. That's a different story. But the point is now what it does to Lucknow as a market, to answer your question. See, it's a market where India is a land of entrepreneurs, right? India has so many entrepreneurs that I don't think if you combine the entrepreneurs of the entire world, it will not match up to the entrepreneur spirit in India. Now, in Lucknow, when an entrepreneur or real estate guy sees that development, sees that rental, sees that area, he gets confidence that, yaar, agar ye kar sakte, to main bhi kar sakta hu. And that's a very Indian thing to say, right? Now, what we are noticing in Lucknow, not only are people coming to us with lands, but there is confidence happening in the real estate sector in Lucknow, where people are ready to invest more in lands, they're ready to do compliant, they're able to see that providing clean warehousing, providing with all approvals has its benefits. They're able to see the transformation of a warehouse into just a storage unit to a multifunctional processing unit. And the ecosystem of vendors, suppliers, retailers is growing around it. The village where the land was available at 2 crores an acre, now suddenly the land price is shot up. There are shops opening, there are small retail establishments that are opening around it to service those parks. There'll be smaller hotels, executive stay suites that will come out to service people who are staying in those parks. So there's an entire ecosystem that starts growing, and the more such examples happen in tier 2, the faster these cities will grow. So I genuinely believe as warehousing players, we play a major role in the impact that we create in every community that we go, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2. Please understand that even the tier 1 spaces are far off, like Bhiwandi, Panvel, Farooq Nagar, very exotic names, Jajjar, right? These are very far off locations, but they are literally in the boonies. There's nothing there. So when you go there and start an ecosystem and start a park, that whole community, labor, employment, tax generation, GST collection, everything goes up in that area. And you have created that impact. So the business is just generally so high on social impact that the ecosystem gets a push, not only in tier 2, but also in tier 1.
Great. So
Just
in the
to
last
add,
section,
to add to what Anshul is saying, whether it's tier 1 cities or tier 2 cities, I think, I'm proud of this and we should all appreciate the fact this is a very labor-intensive industry. I mean, I don't have the stats for it, but the amount of jobs we generate, like per acre of land that we buy, is significantly higher than most other real estate asset classes, infrastructure asset classes are able to generate. And we are not going in places where jobs already exist. Whether it's tier 1 cities, we're driving down 45, 60 minutes away from cities, or tier 2 cities, where we may be about 15 minutes away from city. We're going to communities which direly need this employment generation. So
20,000 people per 100 acres.
Right. So there's, as Anshul said, whether it's impact on ground in terms of what's happening in those communities, or new retail coming up, new hospitality coming up, you'd see the entire ecosystem in a 5-10 kilometer radius change.
great. So we'll move to the technology section, but just if we have time, then we'll come back to this one part of it to say from a government perspective, right? Because government's coming up with zoning policy as well. Does some of that has an impact, on us is what we'll try and cover. But Rajat, contrary question to what let's say you just said in terms of labor intensive side of it, the warehousing industry is also seeing so much of automation getting driven, as well. And ESR is one of the early adopters as well on the digital side of it. So what do you see, let's say the scope, for AI and, ML and, other areas to kind of get done from a warehousing perspective from an India side of things there?
So I'd say we're very, very early in that evolution, right? Truly, I'd say we've only explored 2-3-5% of what AI and machine learning can generate in terms of efficiency in overall logistics supply chain sector in India. And warehousing is a smaller, I'd say, relatively simpler component in the overall supply chain. What most of us are doing, whether it's smaller developers or larger developers right now, is focusing only on the real estate aspect. We're buying land, we're building, we're either leasing or we're selling space, which is either being used to store goods or manufacture goods or assemble goods. But very few of us are right now going beyond it into the warehouse, inside the warehouse, to actually use automation to provide additional efficiencies. I think right now we're too small in terms of scale to significantly explore it. But ultimately, someone mentioned price elasticity and rents. We're a very commoditized business, right? It's relatively, as compared to perhaps building like a Taj where we're in, it's a simpler product to build. For a lot of us to start differentiating us as we scale up, we'd have to do this automation. We'd have to do additional measures to increase efficiency for occupiers inside the warehouse. But frankly, right now, it's 99% lip service, 1% execution. I take it on the chin, even for ESR. I don't think we've done enough. But we're too small right now. I think it's very difficult to execute such automation when you're a 5, 10, 20, 40 million square feet player. As we scale up, we'd see a lot more automation come in. Right now, a lot of this automation is being driven by third-party logistics players who actually occupy the space, and not so much from developers on the ground.
Sure. Rahul, if I come to you, your views on the uses of automation, AI, let's say again from a India perspective, and also if you could layer it from the perspective that 5G has just been launched, in India, and uninterrupted connectivity is very key, for anything which is on automation. So, what's your view on the 5G, let's say, adoption as well, from a warehousing solutions point of view there?
Okay, 5G, I'm not a specialist, okay? But I'll share my 2 bit on warehousing. So one is what Rajat alluded to, that in India, our arbitrage is capital. When we look at more mature economies, the arbitrage is labor. So the technologies that are being adopted in more mature economies is effectively to generate a labor arbitrage. In India, that will happen, and especially on the side of when we do our industrial parks. The other two big impact areas for us currently, one is to say, how do we look at overall park operating efficiencies? So whether that be around safety, security, and maintenance. So how do we monitor it centrally? How do we get our escalations and alerts? And how do we maintain a central dashboard? Beyond that is to see the entire impact on our ESG performance, to say how do we measure and compare our utilities, whether that's solar we be producing or looking at water and waste. So these are the three buckets as landlords. Then within the warehousing, within the facilities, I have actually seen, where it is totally blue collar. It may be that, a million square feet is operating with 3,000-4,000 people. And also, where it is, very heavy, let's say either on the process engineering side or also very heavy margin, let's say retail and fashion, where the ratios may be 1/10 of this. So that's the sort of dispersion I see in the business.
Interesting. Anshul, your views on this?
Yeah, I was just reading up some of my notes on automation, and this is another area where my view is completely different on automation. See, today we are at roughly a $520 odd million industry in warehousing tech. This includes your RFID, your IoT, your warehouse management systems, and all of these good things which are already existing. The estimate from a very renowned resource is about 27 to 28% year-on-year CAGR for this sector to grow. So my view is this is going to be something like the mobile phone, right? Where in India we launched cell phones 10 years later, and as Rahul was saying earlier that we will be leapfrogging, right? This is another area with the national logistics policy coming in place and a concerted effort towards reducing the cost of logistics and a cost of operations will force players to automate faster. So just to, one of our tenants, I can't name it due to confidentiality, is putting a 300 crore sorting machine, right, in one of our warehouses, right? And we know this from fact because we helped them design the layout of our warehouse as per the machine, and it was a very integrated process in leasing this particular warehouse, and it's a very large warehouse. Because we had to match the machine layout and our warehouse layout without making sure that our building is releasable in case this customer leaves. It was a very challenging lease. We had a massive technical team involved, workshops after workshops. But short message is, I would not be surprised if in the next 3 years, we as developers are only doing warehouses along with automation, right? And I don't think it's 4, 5, 7 years away. I think it's around the corner. Tier 1, Tier 2 both. Because see, Tier 2 is catching up tomorrow morning with Tier 1, right? So that's my view on automation.
Interesting. And that's been true for like mobile and also several other industries as well, where we, from a fintech perspective also, the kind of adoption that we've seen and the kind of growth that's happened is phenomenal compared to what one had estimated, let's say, at the initial starts of it there. So moving to the third theme in terms of investments and warehousing perspective. So Rajat, I'll come to you first in terms of, there have been certainly the interest rates have been rising, and which is leading an impact on the yields part of it there. So yields have compressed to 7.5%. And do you see this as a concern area now? And do you see the correction coming in?
No, don't see this as a concern area. I think the market's large enough for everyone's appetite. We're very small right now in terms of invested capital, right? You see a lot of media news about someone committing $2 billion or $1 billion or $500 million. But I think we need to all take that with a pinch of salt. That's capital committed. Are there real opportunities available to deploy, and have people actually deployed it? Not so much right now. Right? Total institutional capital that's actually been deployed, right? Money already spent may not be more than $6-7 billion, which is nothing for a country of the size that we're in. So I think we'll continue to see increasing interest from international players. Everyone's now recognizing the fact that it's possible to do compliant, Class A warehousing in India executed on the ground. Like people are more concerned about ability to execute and then returns come in later. So there's been enough proof of concept established by some of us in the last 5 years, which is what's encouraging a lot of new players, whether they're coming from Asia or Europe or America, to enter the space. You mentioned about core yields compressing. I think core yields have compressed perhaps not just to 7.5%, even sub 7%. Do we see them lasting there? I think that's a very macro question. Depends on what happens to global bond yields, depends on what happens to bond yields in India. Definitely RBI has increased rates in the last 3 months by almost 100 basis points. You'd see expectedly another 50 basis points in the next 3 months. That will put upward pressure on core yields. But I think they'll remain in this, in the range that they're in, anywhere between 6.5 to 7.5. I think that's where we see yields stabilizing, depending on how bond yields are. And given margins in this business, development yields have perhaps compressed from 10 to 9%. So if you just see gross margin, if you build at 9, sell at 7, for some of you better at math, that comes to about 27, 28% gross margin. I think that's sustainable, right? Someone who's targeting 50%, sorry, this is not the sector for you, but someone looking at 20, 30% gross margin, I think that's definitely here to sustain.
Interesting. And Rahul, your views from an international funds perspective? You did mention about the size and scale difference that is there and the kind of opportunity that is there as well. But what's your view from a, let's say, midterm perspective?
See, the view on the sector effectively is to say the underlying fundamentals and the demand appetite, it's very strong. And then this is a asset class effectively which is annuity plus appreciation. And specifically for India, because the total scale is so small, we are just starting off.
And Anshul, if I come to you, if you can give us a domestic view as well, in terms of the domestic funds, what do you see as, from a domestic side of it for warehousing sector? What's the excitement? What is the level of engagement that you see now versus, let's say, before?
Yeah. So my favorite question, because we launched India's first AIF for warehousing. It's still the only product out there. If a domestic investor wants to invest in warehousing, there is no other platform in the country. And what gave rise to this was we were a bit irritated that why is foreign capital coming to India and reaping the benefits of Indian warehousing return, where our Indian investors have no outlet to do this. And domestic capital is what I was told is a double-edged sword. Investors will come after you. You'll get calls after calls. You'll be managing. We haven't gotten one phone call from any investor in 2 years. So the domestic investor is so mature today, the domestic HNI, and the SEBI regulations have been so robust when it comes to AIF that when you start comparing India as a regulatory environment compared to a SEC in Singapore, SEC in US, or in Singapore, or in London, the regulatory framework is very robust and it's improving every day. So more and more AIFs, more and more funds are getting launched for you as an investor to, rather than going through the hassle of buying land, building, leasing, exiting, right? You can buy units of an AIF or a fund by putting a mere 1 crore rupees at a minimum. And for 1 crore rupees, you are now an owner of a warehouse. This story we felt when we launched it, we were the first ones, so we had a very difficult time. Now, to answer your question, what we are seeing is a massive demand, especially for a fund that's performed. We are giving exits very soon at that number which Rajat just took. We are giving about 26, 27% IRR exits in our first few assets. We are just launching that process. But point is that, there is a huge robust demand, but the domestic HNI is very smart. They will want to see a complete setup. They will want to see your land buying capabilities, your execution capabilities, your leasing capabilities, your exit capabilities, your complete group strength, your trust, your governance. It's actually put to test far more. When I was running the Warburg Pincus joint venture with Embassy, we had to convince one fund. Now here I had to convince 175 investors that my governance is very strong. So the only way to do that is to actually make the governance strong. So I must say that our governance is stronger than most platforms because of that fact, because we don't have a choice and because it's also by choice. So domestic environment continues to be very favorable. I think the market size is extremely deep. There is recently a fund that I heard which got launched by Edelweiss, which was a Yield Plus Infra Fund, which has 4 road assets, very similar to our business. They raised 4,000 crores domestically in their capital, 4,000 crores of equity domestically. That's serious money, right? So yeah, my view is extremely positive on this space.
So, just to kind of add and close loop here, we've talked about demand. We're talking about capital right now. I'd like to believe in, Rahul, Anshul, your thoughts on this. I don't think demand is a problem here. I don't think capital is a problem here. The problem really is, can you create supply? Can you create supply in the right locations? Is there scalable land available to buy in the right locations? Can you overcome Indian challenges when it comes to getting government approvals to build, getting the right ecosystem of vendors available to execute on the ground? It's all about, who can create the right supply at the right location, right? There is enough capital chasing both the development part of the overall, fundraising cycle and core, but it's about, can you really create supply? Because even within core, even if today, let's assume I've got $1 billion check to underwrite to buy core at a 7% yield, which is aggressive. Is there a product available? There isn't. There isn't. So it's all about creating supply, both on the land side and ready product on the core side. I think that scale up is what will take time. And then there's capital always available to be deployed.
Correct. So in a few minutes, we'll come to you, for the Q&A with the audience as well. So you've been a very patient audience, just to see that, your questions that you have in your mind, will just come to you in about 7-8 minutes. So keep them ready as well. Let's move to the last theme, from a infrastructure push and the regulatory policy environment side of it. So Anshul, starting with you in terms of, currently the warehousing demand, is kind of driven through third-party logistics, FMCG, e-commerce, retail players effectively there. Now the government, and Rahul alluded to that as well initially, that there is so many schemes that the government has launched, and there's so much of manufacturing push, whether it's PLI, whether it's, PM Gati Shakti, and, changes that are happening in the policy environment as well. So how do you see this demand mix changing? This demand mix will continue to be like that, or will the composition of that change very, very strongly?
It's a
You can give a dimension also, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, what do you see?
Sure. So very, very interesting question. I'm just trying to frame my thoughts together, but see, what's happening is the next 10 years really is, and everybody in the world agrees with this, is India's decade, right? And just look at the GST collection of India in the last year was, in Jan 2022 was about 1,38,000 crores. And in April was 1,63,000 crores, and it's expected to go up to 2 lakh crores, right? Why is this happening? This is just a factual numbers available. It's because of the policy and regulatory environment that's changing. Now, India's government has never been this stable, right? The stability of our government instills a massive amount of confidence in the citizens to kind of start ending that parallel economy. With the e-commerce drive, with the pandemic, everything going online, everything going digital, what's going to happen to the demand mix of warehousing space? Now, if you just funnel this whole story of India growing like crazy, GST collections going up, capex expansions, etc., what does that mean for warehousing specifically, right? What it means is that the product mix of warehousing will completely change. So the first mile, mid-mile, and last mile. Mid-mile in India hasn't yet taken off. That will take off now. That's going to start. Mid-mile is going to become very, very important. So mid-mile locations require a massive focus. First mile is already now fairly established, product is established, size is established, players are established, laws are established. But first mile is going to become bigger and badder. So the warehouses in terms of size are going to go up significantly, in terms of heights are going to go up significantly, and in terms of capital requirements are going to double, triple, or quadruple. So it's not going to remain a small boys game anymore. It's going to get an even bigger boys game, because money requirement is going to be huge. Customers will ask for much, much more automated spaces than they're asking even today, which means the specifications of the product will completely undergo a change. 5 years later, the warehouse, you will not recognize the warehouse you are today. This took in US, Europe, UK 30 years to happen. But in India, it will happen much faster. Like Rajat mentioned, like Rahul mentioned about the leapfrogging. Now, come to the last mile. So the labor cost and fuel cost of logistics constitutes about 60% of cost of operations. Real estate is only 4 to 8%, depending on your location, etc. 4 to 8%, that's it. That's all the warehouse costs, right? Now imagine you want last mile delivery, because now today, nobody has patience. If I go on Amazon and press click, I don't want to wait for my product to come. Why should I wait? I've already paid the money, I have my credit card, I want my product in my hand now, right? Same day nahi, same hour is the expectation of the customer. So with that, last mile is going to be huge. We can't even begin to imagine the scale of last mile in India. So last mile, just imagine 4 to 6% real estate cost and 60% operation cost. So why would you have one warehouse here, one there, one there? You will just build G plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, plus 4. Because your real estate cost is only 4 to 6, 8%, maybe 10% within city, maybe 12%. It's still a fractional number. So last mile product mix will change completely with ASRS and with automation. And this, in the next 3 to 5 years, will what the landscape will look like. Now, what will give a kicker to all this? And this is going to happen regardless of policy. This is going to happen regardless of government intervention. Yes, in fact, Rahul sent an email yesterday asking for zoning for in-city. I saw that, very interesting point. I hadn't even thought about that, right? And zoning for in-city is still not done. So I think that's something that will come in. But regardless of these 2-3 interventions, if the national logistics policy, which was unveiled by our Honorable Prime Minister a few weeks ago, if we even achieve half of that, or 40% of that, it's a game changer. Because the policy is extremely well thought through. It's put together by some really smart people, and it's extremely comprehensive. And I've read it word to word. And I can promise you that if that policy starts getting implemented, if that direction gets followed, then the complete warehousing environment and logistics environment in India will undergo a massive transformation. That's my view.
So Rahul, your views on specifically this point, as well as if you can touch upon the zoning aspect of it as well, because the government's going to come up with a warehousing policy or the zoning side of it. What does it mean? So when you look at this demand mix changing, when you look at the regulatory environment changing, also there is a a push. If I put a loaded question to it, that there is a lot of green, from a green supply chain as well, and renewable energy uses is what being spoken about. So in terms of construction, in terms of operation, and in terms of the customer, a lot has to change, is what Anshul also highlighted for us. What's your view on this?
See, first, I was very intently hearing Anshul. And he said, this is India's decade, okay? So McKinsey has said, this is not India's decade. This is India's century. Okay. So if we have that perspective, product side, he's already alluded to and what's going to happen. Let me touch for a minute on what we expect the government to further do. And I think one reason for us to come to platforms like this and share our thoughts is that we are all involved stakeholders. And when we exchange thoughts with each other, A, it leads to refinement of thoughts, and B, then we can present those thoughts right to different stakeholders. So one, when he spoke of the massive push which is in stock for last mile, see, if we don't do zoning of last mile, then we will never create an efficient and compliant industry. And all mature economies have that. And in India, because real estate is still a state subject and our asset classes have effectively been only, residential, commercial, industrial, and then we keep on flipping asset use in states. So that doesn't lead to efficiency. So it's very high time that all governments start seeing warehousing as a specific asset class to serve those consumers. Now, forward-looking governments will say, hey, it's not only important for me for today, but it's going to be important for me to start attracting investments for my state and making my states more livable. And I see actually at least a dozen states in India where the chief ministers have this very progressive vision. Along with that, I think our asset class has a massive advantage that India can exploit. So we have a goal of reaching 500 gigawatts of clean energy for India by 2030. So do we keep on investing huge amount in land and capex and all that? No. Look at our industry. We have millions of square feet of roof space. So we can actually transform India's demand for energy, and we can contribute our bit to making India's energy security much better. You know, just allow the industry to feed into the grid. And we are very happy to be spending the capex, you know, and doing photovoltaic on top. And not only this, how do you get more institutional players also to come in? So globally, just solar energy also contributes from, you know, very high, low single digits to early double digits, also of sustainable top line performance for companies. You know, so that becomes like the bread and butter there. But much more than that, if we look at our country, you know, this year rupees depreciated 11%, and 80% of that goes just to take care of our energy bill. I think so warehousing has an element to contribute just beyond the sector itself. So Rajat was saying, look at the number of blue collar jobs it's able to create in very Mofussil towns and localities. So it's brilliant for job generation, and I think beyond the sector, we should see what can warehousing do to enable India's energy security.
Actually, just to explain what Raghav said, or Rahul said in brief, what do we really need when we say we need zoning for in-city, right? Today, if, let's say, you know, us as a platform, any of us as a platform want to enter a city like Delhi, right? And we say we want to build a ground plus 4-story warehouse, who do we go to? There is no answer to that. You'd be shocked, there is no answer to that. There is no law that states you can build G+4 warehouse in Delhi or in Bangalore or in some of the other large cities, which means that if you go to a bureaucrat sitting in a DDA or, you know, Bangalore Development Authority, BDA, and ask them for approval, there is no set of guidelines for the bureaucrat to even refer to give you the consent. Fire norms as part of our national building bylaw policy say that you cannot store goods above 18-20 meters. You can live 100 meters, you know, in 100-meter tall residential buildings, have office, but you cannot store goods. If that's not archaic, I don't know what's archaic, right? Are lives more important to protect, or are goods more important to protect? So if lives can live 100 meters tall, why can't goods be stored 100 meters tall? As long as we're building, you know, spaces which are compliant, which have enough insulation measures, let us go vertical. How will we develop last mile warehousing within 10 minutes of where you stay unless we can go vertical? Otherwise, we'll always underutilize available space. You know, you can't just build horizontal ground floor only structures in the middle of Delhi, in the middle of Santa Cruz, where we are in Bombay, and pay the land value that exists. So it's very important for everyone to recognize this is a scalable asset class. This is, you know, something that consumers today really need. And we need a separate asset class zoning each of the large cities, tier 1 and tier 2, as Anshul alluded to address this. And you know, we're not asking for any favor. We're just saying put up the set of guidelines and we'll follow it.
Great. As always, was greedy for more questions, but we are out of time. Sapna, can we do 1 or 2 questions? So if you could raise your hand, state your name and your question, and if you're addressing a specific panelist, please mention that as well. I think it's working.
Hello, I'm Sunil Bajaj. I observe one thing, the logistics park which is coming up, warehousing is more towards Bhiwandi. And this side of Bombay, where New Bombay, whether it's airport is coming up, an existing port is a good network of road and railway network, we hardly find anything. And second thing is, Nagpur being the center of India, what's the prospect of warehousing there? So, Bhiwandi, though it's far from Bombay compared to New Bombay.
Yeah, sorry, interesting you mentioned that. I was discussing this in office today with my team, that why don't we look at that sector? I think things in India take time, right? Bhiwandi wasn't built in a day. Bhiwandi took 35, 40 years to get to where it is, which means that it's got labor ecosystem in place, laws in place, vendor ecosystem in place. And can that happen, in the region where, the region that you're talking about? I think it can definitely happen. Distance from Bombay is pretty similar. With the new flyover that's coming up, connecting Uran from South Bombay, with the new airport supposed to come up in the next 5-7 years. I mean, I'll add a couple of years buffer to what, people expect these infrastructure, initiatives to come up in. Let's say we take 5 years instead of 2 years, but they will come up. Which means that there is massive potential in that particular region to be utilized for warehousing and even for industrial, parks. I think that will definitely happen. It's just that some of us need to be bold enough to take that bet of going there and creating the initial ecosystem, which I'm pretty confident will happen in the next 2-3 years. Because Bhiwandi, to a large extent, is saturated, but Bombay is not saturated, right? The demand's still there. It'll ultimately have to go either further north towards Gujarat or south towards the region you're talking about. So I think we'll see expansion on both sides. So Nagpur particularly, you need to establish about where all, what are the regions being served by Nagpur? Are you serving only the Nagpur local economy? Are you using the new, to be the Samruddhi corridor that's coming up to go 300, 400 kilometers, further up north or further south? I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. I think Nagpur can be utilized as a place to serve that part of Maharashtra within a 100, 120 kilometer radius. Nagpur's already seen large warehouses. I know Reliance is a large warehouse there. Future Supply Chain is a large warehouse there. You've got a lot of players, even I think pharmaceutical players. Reckitt Beckinsale has a large warehouse there. So you already have presence of 3-4 large industrial tenants. You have large industrial parks. Now, can it grow to 3x, 4x size, within the next 4-5 years? Maybe not so much. But can you have 1 to 2 million square feet of annual absorption of warehousing demand? Add a decent accretive rent of perhaps 20, 22 bucks per square foot per month. You'd see that.
Any last question? All right, so with that, we'll bring this session to a close. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and also for sharing your thoughts, experiences, as well as outlook as well there. So wonderful.
Thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause to also thank all our speakers? And if I could please invite Himanshu Agrawal, President, Tikitar Danosa India Private Limited, to please present a token of our appreciation to all of our speakers, all of our panelists. And let's have all of you come together for a group photograph as well. If I could request every one of you to come together for a quick group photograph.